The Bible is one of the most detailed books ever written. It records genealogies going back thousands of years. It tracks the movements of armies, the words of kings, the prayers of prophets. It tells us what people ate, what they wore, how they built their houses, and yet, for the most important person who ever lived, it goes completely silent for 18 years. Jesus appears in the Gospel of Luke at age 12, sitting in the temple in Jerusalem, surrounded by teachers, asking questions that leave grown scholars speechless. And then, nothing. No record, no story, no explanation. The next time we see him, he is 30 years old, standing at the Jordan River, about to be baptized by John. 18 years, gone. Scholars call them the lost years, the hidden years, the silent years. And the question those years raise is one of the most fascinating in all of human history. Where was Jesus? What was he doing? What happened during those 18 years that shaped the man who would walk out of a carpenter's town and change the entire world? The Bible doesn't tell us, but other ancient texts do, or at least they claim to. Tonight we are going to explore every serious answer to this question. We are going to look at what the Apocryphal Gospels say, the ancient texts that didn't make it into the Bible. We are going to examine the historical and cultural context that tells us what a Jewish boy from Nazareth would most likely have been doing. And we are going to ask the deeper question underneath all of this. Why did the Gospel writers leave those years out? Was it an accident, a lack of information, or was it intentional? And if so, what does that silence itself tell us? Stay with me. This is one of the most thought-provoking mysteries in all of Scripture. Before we look at what the apocryphal texts say, we need to sit with what the Bible actually does tell us. Because there is more in those few verses than most people notice. Only one gospel even mentions Jesus as a child beyond the birth narratives. That gospel is Luke. And Luke chapter 2 gives us the only recorded event from Jesus' childhood, the visit to Jerusalem at age 12. Every Jewish family was expected to travel to Jerusalem 3 times a year for the major festivals: Passover, Pentecost, and the Feast of Tabernacles. Luke tells us that Joseph and Mary made this pilgrimage every year. When Jesus was 12, they made the journey as a family. The feast concluded. The family began the long walk home to Nazareth, a journey of about 3 days. And a full day into the journey, Mary and Joseph realized something terrifying. Jesus was not with them. Now, before you judge Mary and Joseph for this, understand how these pilgrimages worked. Entire villages traveled together. Extended families, neighbors, friends, children ran between households freely. It was entirely reasonable to assume your 12-year-old was somewhere in the traveling group, with cousins, with friends, with other relatives. But he wasn't. They turned back to Jerusalem, and after 3 days of searching, 3 agonizing days, they found him, in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening to them, asking them questions. And the text says something remarkable. Everyone who heard him was amazed at his understanding and his answers. Not just politely impressed, amazed. The Greek word is existanto, to be utterly astounded, to be knocked out of one's normal state of mind. This was not a bright child impressing adults with precocious cleverness. This was something that stopped learned men cold. Mary said what any mother would say. "Son, why have you treated us this way? Your father and I have been searching for you in great distress." And Jesus answered with the first recorded words of his life. "Why were you looking for me? Did you not know that I must be in my Father's house?" My Father's house. Not Joseph's house. Not home in Nazareth. His Father's house. Even at 12, he knew who he was. And then, the most understated transition in the New Testament. Luke 2, 51, 52. And he went down with them, and came to Nazareth, and was submissive to them. And his mother treasured up all these things in her heart. And Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and with man. He went home. He was submissive to them. He grew. And then 18 years of silence. Luke was a careful historian. He tells us in his opening verses that he investigated everything carefully before writing. He interviewed eyewitnesses. He compiled accounts. He was thorough. So why the silence? The most straightforward historical answer is this. Luke included the temple story because it was extraordinary. It showed Jesus' divine identity even as a child. Everything else about those years was ordinary, normal, not newsworthy by the standards of what Luke was trying to accomplish. Luke was not writing a biography in the modern sense. He was writing a theological account of the ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus. The hidden years had nothing dramatic to report, and so they were not reported. This is actually consistent with how ancient biographies worked. Greek and Roman writers regularly skipped from birth to the beginning of a subject's public career. Childhood and young adulthood were simply not considered relevant unless something extraordinary happened. But that explanation, while historically reasonable, doesn't satisfy the human longing. And so people have been looking for answers elsewhere. Before we get into the apocryphal texts, I want to hear from you. Had you ever thought about the lost years of Jesus before today? Did it ever strike you as strange that the Bible just skips 18 years of his life? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And let me know, do you think those years were truly ordinary? Or does the silence itself feel significant to you? In the centuries following Jesus' death and resurrection, a number of texts circulated in early Christian communities that attempted to fill in the gaps the canonical Gospels left open. These texts are broadly called the Apocryphal Gospels, from the Greek word apokryphos, meaning hidden or concealed. They were not included in the biblical canon, for important reasons we'll discuss, but they were widely read. They were treasured in certain communities, and they give us a window into what early Christians believed and wondered about the life of Jesus. The two most significant texts dealing with Jesus' childhood are the Infancy Gospel of Thomas and the Proto-Gospel of James. Let's take them one by one. The Infancy Gospel of Thomas, not to be confused with the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, is a text that probably dates to the 2nd century AD. It claims to record remarkable events from Jesus' childhood in Nazareth, from ages 5 to 12, and the stories it tells are extraordinary and sometimes deeply unsettling. The text opens with 5-year-old Jesus playing by a stream on the Sabbath. He gathers water into pools and makes clay sparrows from the mud. A Jewish man named Annas sees this and complains to Joseph, "Why is your child doing this on the Sabbath? He breaks our law." And Jesus, according to this text, claps his hands and says to the clay birds, "Go away, fly away, and be remembered." The clay sparrows come alive and fly away, chirping. This is a miracle designed to show divine authority even in early childhood. Interestingly, a similar story appears in Islamic tradition. The Quran in Surah 349 and 5:110 records that Prophet Isa breathed life into clay birds, which is striking given that the Infancy Gospel of Thomas predates the Quran by several centuries. But the text also contains stories that are more troubling. In another episode, a boy accidentally bumps into Jesus' shoulder in the village. Jesus, offended, says, "You shall not complete your journey," and the boy falls dead. When the parents of the dead child complain to Joseph, Jesus strikes them blind. These stories are so at odds with everything we know about Jesus from the canonical Gospels that most scholars, and indeed most early church leaders, viewed them with serious suspicion. Origen in the 3rd century acknowledged the text existed, but treated it with great caution. Jerome, who compiled the Latin Bible, rejected it. The text was not seriously considered for inclusion in the canon. Why? Because the Jesus of the Infancy Gospel of Thomas behaves like a volatile, unpredictable child deity, not the one who said, "Let the little children come to me," who healed rather than harmed, who came not to judge the world, but to save it. The character doesn't match. And this is actually an important point in biblical studies. One of the tests for authentic apostolic documents was consistency of character. A text that portrays Jesus in ways fundamentally inconsistent was considered unreliable. The Infancy Gospel of Thomas ends, significantly, with the same temple story Luke records, as though even its author acknowledged that the canonical account was the authoritative version of that event. The Proto-Gospel of James, also called the Proto-Evangelium of James, is another early text, probably 2nd century, that focuses primarily on Mary, her miraculous birth, her upbringing in the temple, her betrothal to Joseph, and the birth of Jesus. It is from this text that many traditions about Mary entered Christian devotion, including her parents' names, Joachim and Anna. The text does not deal with Jesus' hidden years directly, but it established a rich tradition of reflection on the Holy Family. Here is the honest assessment. The Infancy Gospels do not provide reliable historical information about what Jesus did during his hidden years. They are theological reflections, imaginative expansions written by people who, like us, wanted to know more than the canonical Gospels told them. They reflect 2nd century Christian curiosity, not 1st century historical memory. But they are not worthless. They tell us something important. From very early in Christian history, believers could not stop thinking about those missing years. The silence created a vacuum, and imagination rushed in to fill it. That impulse, that longing, is itself revealing. It tells us something about the power of Jesus' life. Even people who had never met him could not stop wondering about those 18 years. Beyond the Apocryphal Gospels, a number of more dramatic theories have emerged over the centuries, and especially in modern times, about where Jesus went during his hidden years. These theories deserve honest examination. In 1894, a Russian journalist named Nicholas Notovitch published a book claiming that while recovering from an injury in a Himalayan monastery, he had been shown an ancient manuscript called The Life of Saint Isa. According to this manuscript, which Notovitch claimed monks read to him and he translated, a young man named Isa had traveled from Israel to India as a teenager. He studied with Brahmin priests and Buddhist monks for years, and then returned to his homeland to teach. Notovitch identified Isa as Jesus. The book was a sensation. It sold widely. It captured imaginations across Europe and America. And then scholars began investigating. Multiple researchers traveled to the same monastery Notovitch claimed to have visited. The head monk stated flatly that he had never met Notovitch. Other monks denied any knowledge of such a manuscript. When pressed, Notovitch's story collapsed under examination. The scholarly consensus was clear. The manuscript was fabricated. However, the India theory did not die with Notovitch. It has been revived multiple times by different authors, drawing on different sources. Some point to similarities between certain teachings of Jesus and Buddhist philosophy. Others note that the trade routes connecting the Mediterranean world to India were well established by the 1st century, so travel was theoretically possible. But possibility is not evidence, and no credible ancient source places Jesus in India. The Egypt connection is actually the one with the strongest biblical foundation, though it applies to Jesus' infancy rather than his hidden years. Matthew 2 records that after the visit of the Magi, Joseph took Mary and the infant Jesus to Egypt to escape Herod's massacre of the children. They remained there until Herod's death. Some scholars speculate that this Egyptian period, probably lasting 1 to 4 years, may have given the young Jesus exposure to Egyptian religious thought, mystical traditions, and wisdom literature. There is also an ancient tradition preserved in certain Coptic Christian texts, the Christians of Egypt, that trace specific locations where the Holy Family rested during their time in Egypt. These sites became places of pilgrimage. But as for Jesus returning to Egypt during the hidden years, there is no historical evidence for this. Perhaps the most beloved of the exotic theories in the English-speaking world is the idea that Jesus traveled to Britain, specifically to Glastonbury in Somerset, in the company of his great-uncle Joseph of Arimathea, who was supposedly a tin merchant with trade connections to Britain. This theory inspired the famous William Blake poem that begins, "And did those feet in ancient time walk upon England's mountains green?" A poem so beloved it became the unofficial anthem of England. The theory was popularized in the 19th century and became deeply embedded in British Christian folklore. But again, there is no historical documentation earlier than medieval legend. The trade routes did exist. Tin was indeed exported from Cornwall, but the leap from trade routes existed to Jesus personally traveled them as a teenager is enormous and unsupported. I want to pause here and say something important. These theories are appealing for deeply human reasons. We love mystery. We love the idea of hidden knowledge. We love the thought that there is more to the story than what the official record preserves. And the longing behind these theories is not dishonest. It comes from a genuine place, a desire to know more about the most extraordinary person who ever lived. But longing is not evidence. And when theories about Jesus' hidden years move from careful historical investigation to wishful speculation or outright fabrication, they do not honor him. They project onto him a story of our own making. The honest answer, which we will get to, is actually more beautiful than any of these theories. If this exploration of Jesus' hidden years is speaking to you, please take 1 second right now and hit the like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who are hungry for exactly this kind of deep, honest biblical exploration. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. Hit subscribe and the bell. We go this deep every single week. Now, let me tell you what I believe is the most honest, most historically grounded, and most theologically rich answer to the question of the lost years. When we set aside the apocryphal imaginings and the exotic travel theories, and when we actually look at the historical, cultural, and scriptural evidence, a picture emerges that is both ordinary and profound. And I would argue it is more meaningful than any of the dramatic alternatives. The starting point is the word the Gospel of Mark uses to describe Jesus. When Jesus began teaching in his hometown of Nazareth in Mark chapter 6, verse 3, the townspeople said, "Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary?" The carpenter, not the former carpenter, not the man who used to be a carpenter before he became a rabbi. The carpenter, as if that was still his identity in their minds, because for most of his 30 years, that is what he had been. The Greek word is tekton, which in its broadest sense means craftsman or builder. It could refer to working with wood, stone, or any building material. In first-century Galilee, it most likely meant a skilled tradesman who worked with both wood and stone, making furniture, agricultural tools, door frames, roof beams. This was Jesus' trade. This was how his family earned its income. This was what he did with his hands every day for approximately 18 years. And there is something breathtaking about that if you let it settle. The one who spoke the universe into existence, who in the beginning said, "Let there be light," and light appeared, spent 18 years in a small Galilean town, learning to cut wood straight and hammer nails true. The creator of all things became a craftsman of small things. Another significant historical reality of the hidden years is almost certainly this: Joseph died. After the temple visit at age 12, Joseph simply disappears from the gospel narrative. He is never mentioned during Jesus' ministry. When Jesus is dying on the cross, he entrusts his mother Mary to the care of the beloved disciple John, a gesture that would be unnecessary. This strongly suggests Joseph died sometime during Jesus' teens or 20s. And what does that mean practically? It means Jesus, as the oldest son in the family, would have become the head of the household, the provider, the one responsible for his mother and his younger brothers and sisters. He would have worked, not because he had to, in any cosmic sense, but because love shows up, because responsibility is real, because the Son of God, who could have been anything, chose in this season to simply be a faithful son, a good older brother, a reliable neighbor. This is the hidden years, not exotic travel, not secret knowledge. The young man in a small town, working with his hands, caring for his family, faithful in the small things, growing in wisdom and stature, as Luke quietly tells us he did, year by year, in ways no one recorded, because no one imagined they needed to. But here is where it gets even more interesting. The Jesus who emerges at 30, to begin his ministry, is extraordinarily well educated in the scriptures. His teaching in the synagogues amazes people. His knowledge of Torah, of the Psalms, of the prophets, is not that of a self-taught tradesman. It is deep, precise, and creative in ways that suggest years of serious study. How? In first-century Jewish life, education was embedded in the community. The synagogue was not just a place of worship, it was a school. Every Sabbath, the Torah was read aloud, discussed, interpreted. Boys were educated in the scriptures from childhood. The expectation was that every Jewish male would know the Torah. And Jesus, we already know from age 12, had a grasp of scripture that astonished trained teachers. Imagine 18 more years of that. 18 years of Sabbath readings. 18 years of festivals and their meanings. 18 years of daily prayer, of psalms recited, of prophetic texts meditated on. By the time Jesus stood up in the synagogue, at age 30, he read from the scroll of Isaiah, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor," and said, "Today this scripture is fulfilled in your hearing."
He had been living with those words for decades. The hidden years were not empty. They were full of work and grief and faithfulness and scripture and prayer and the quiet daily choice to trust God in the ordinary, which is the hardest trust of all. I want to stop here and ask you something personal. Is there a season in your own life right now that feels like the hidden years? Ordinary, unnoticed, unremarkable, where you are wondering if anything significant is happening? Drop something in the comments. You don't have to share details.
Just let me know. Can you relate to this season of hiddenness that Jesus walked through? Now I want to make what I think is the most important point of this entire video. The silence of the Gospels about Jesus' hidden years is not a problem to be solved. It is a message to be received. Think about what the silence communicates. It communicates that 18 years of ordinary faithfulness, of working a trade, of caring for a family, of being a good neighbor, those years mattered. They counted. They were not wasted time while Jesus waited for his ministry to begin. They were the ministry, or rather, they were the formation. Jesus did not emerge from the wilderness at 30 as a fully formed preacher who had been waiting in storage. He emerged as a person who had been shaped, who had grieved the loss of a father, who had felt the ache of tired muscles at the end of a long day, who had laughed with neighbors and worried about finances and prayed when heaven felt silent. He was, the book of Hebrews tells us, tempted in every way as we are, not just in the wilderness, but across 30 years of ordinary human life. And because he lived those hidden years, because he was not exempt from them, he can meet us in ours. The writer of Hebrews says it like this: "For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin." He knows what it is to be uncelebrated, to be unrecognized, to live faithfully in a small town where nobody has any idea who you really are. He knows what it is to wait. And that knowledge, that experience, is not incidental. It is foundational to it. One more layer to this that I find deeply comforting. Virtually every person God used significantly in Scripture had their own hidden years first. Moses spent 40 years in the wilderness of Midian before the burning bush. 40 years, tending sheep, after growing up in Pharaoh's palace, after a dramatic failure when he killed an Egyptian and had to flee. 40 years of nothing remarkable, and then God spoke. David spent years as a shepherd on the hillsides of Bethlehem before Samuel anointed him king. Years alone with his sheep and his harp and his prayers. Nobody watching, nobody recording. And in that hiddenness, he became the man who could write, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." He knew what a shepherd was. He had been one. Paul, after his dramatic conversion on the road to Damascus, spent approximately 3 years in Arabia before his public ministry began. 3 years, not teaching, not planting churches, just being with God. And then he turned the ancient world upside down. The pattern is consistent. God does not waste the hidden years. He uses them. The size of the public ministry is often a direct reflection of the depth of the private formation. For Jesus, the formation was long. 30 years of hiddenness for 3 years of public ministry. And those 3 years split human history in half. Let me bring us back to where we started and give you a clear, honest answer about the apocryphal texts. Should we read them? Should we trust them? What is their value? The apocryphal infancy Gospels are not scripture. They were not written by apostles or people with direct access to apostolic testimony. The early church, after careful deliberation, did not include them in the canon. And the reasons were good ones. Inconsistent character, late composition, no reliable chain of testimony connecting them to Jesus himself. But they are not worthless. They are a window into what early Christians wondered, hoped, and imagined about Jesus. They tell us that from the 2nd century onward, the hidden years created a longing that people tried to satisfy. And some of the theological instincts in those texts, the sense that Jesus was uniquely divine from earliest childhood, that he was set apart, that his identity was apparent even when unrecognized, those instincts are consistent with what the canonical Gospels teach. Read them if you are curious, with your eyes open. Know what they are. Don't mistake them for scripture. Don't reject them as worthless.
And then come back to Luke's quiet verses. He went home. He was submissive. He grew. That simplicity is not a failure of reporting. It is the shape of faithfulness. He grew. Year by year, in a small town, with a carpenter's hands, under his father's roof, in the presence of his Father in heaven. He grew. I want to close with something that has stayed with me every time I study this passage. Luke 2:52 says that Jesus increased in wisdom and in stature and in favor with God and man. Increased. The word implies a process, something that happened over time. Not a switch that was flipped, not a sudden transformation, a steady, daily, unremarkable growing. Jesus increased. The eternal Son of God, who had no need of anything, chose to grow, chose to learn, chose to develop in wisdom through the ordinary processes of human life.
He was fully God and fully man, and the man part of him sat in a synagogue every Sabbath and heard the same Torah readings he had always heard, and found something new in them, because he was growing. That image stays with me. If the Son of God grew through hiddenness and ordinariness, why do we think we should be exempt from the same process? If the one who would change the world spent 18 years in a small town, why are we so convinced that our own hidden seasons are evidence that God has forgotten us? He has not forgotten you. He is growing you, quietly, patiently, in ways you cannot see and may not recognize for years. The hidden years of Jesus are Scripture's gentlest, most profound reminder that the most significant things God does in a person, He often does in secret. And then one day, the right moment comes. The river is waiting. The Spirit descends, and the voice from heaven speaks. This is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. Well pleased. Not despite the hidden years. Because of them. If this video moved you, if it gave you something to carry into your own hidden season, I want to ask you to do 3 things before you go. First, hit the like button right now. 1 second. It means everything for helping this channel reach people who need exactly this kind of deep, honest engagement with Scripture. Second, subscribe and hit the bell. Every week on this channel we go this deep. The lost years of Jesus today. What is coming next will go just as far. You do not want to miss it. Third, leave me a comment. I want to know your thoughts. Is there a part of this video that personally spoke to you? Were you surprised by any of the apocryphal texts? Or does the idea of Jesus' quiet, ordinary, hidden years resonate with something in your own life right now? This comment section is a real community. I read every single comment. I respond. Let's keep going deeper together. I will see you in the next video. God bless you.